Hi everyone, delonewolf here and welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. It's definitely an interesting week so far in EVE Online with at the moment the special skill point weekend that is happening. So if you log in after downtime you get extra skill points that you can redeem for I think one of your characters. Interesting. I'm not really sure where this is coming from. I personally feel like skill points are already quite plentiful and the ability to trade in them is actually something that is not entirely good for the health of the game, but it looks like CCP wants to reward us with even more skill points in general. So alright, everybody is in general pretty happy with that. Of course, if they're working on a goal, then this tends to boost them forward quite nicely. I myself I think when I go into the precursor ships, I still have to train for the battle cruiser, perhaps the Tech 2 Logi as well. We'll see how that works out. Next up, we also have a small sale going on, 50% off of the Omega game time. We'll see if that has an impact on the market. And then, of course, we also had a mass test last week, which was a resounding success from a mass testing perspective. Not so much for me personally, as I was trying to make a recording, but we had so many crashes that it basically became impossible to make anything coherent out of what was happening there. So it was a major success because that's why we're testing. You want to have the crashes and to spot the crashes on the test server rather than on TQ, but it was really bad. Even the CCP devs themselves kept crashing, lost complete control of all the fleets, and so we had to cut the test short. Basically, we couldn't do all the steps. That's the first time that that's happened in a very long time, that things were this chaotic on the test server. But good thing it's happening there. It gives CCP a good chance to fix things, and I'm not sure what was behind it, of course. Hopefully CCP can find the cause very quickly, but the mass test was aimed at diminishing returns for remote reps. So let's move on to the New Eden store. New skin, look at that, Galente focused. The Kai Neon skin does look absolutely amazing. Just look at that Hecate. That looks very, very cool. 110 plex. Personally feel like this is pretty reasonable. Ishtar has one as well. Looks quite amazing. The Ishtar has a lot of amazing skins already, but man, you also have one for the Erebus, the Nyx, the Thanatos, and the Kronos. Looks pretty damn good. Here we get the sale going on, 30 days Omega clone time, 425 plex rather than 500 plex, trying to lower demand a little bit, but is it helping? We'll take a look at that right now, because we are moving on to the market. As always, we're gonna start with some plex and stuff, and that's gonna happen at 305. Like that. Let's go into the markets, plex and stuff, and start off with plex in GTAF. Ooh, man, in the time that I was recording recording the prices in GTAF for my ticker, it looks like we went up again in GTAF 4 to 4.6 million for the sellers of plex, buyers up to 4.3 million, and then if we put up the filter, it's 4.5 million for the sellers in the player owned trade hubs, and then 4.4 million for the buyers as well. Man, that's a super narrow margin there. If you look on the charts, we are just continuing to increase in price despite the fact that we have a plex sale going on right now. And for me, this is quite a surprise, but this is bubble behavior. I do think that I put that warning in last week that these tend to go much higher than I personally expect them to. And so now we'll take a quick look at the price here. If we want to buy 500 of these, 2.24 billion ISK for a month of Omega time, and if it's in Cheetah, it's gonna be even worse, of course. Let's do 500 of buy this one. 2.3 billion ISK in GTAP 4.4 in order to purchase 500 plex, which gets you 1 month game time. Super expensive, has to be the all-time high price, and just there is no stopping this. But from my perspective, this is bubble behavior, and perhaps now I'm really getting the itch to go out there and sell my own plex at these prices, because this is getting ridiculous. This is not sustainable. New players, if they see that they have to go for 2.3 billion ISK in order to get a a free month, which is of course what a lot of new players consider that, then that is just going to be so much effort that it feels completely out of reach. So crazy situation in my opinion. Would love to hear your perspective as well. Do you think that this is a bubble, or do you actually think that this is something that's here to stay, that there are forces working behind the scenes that are basically creating so much ISK and stuff in the game that the inflation is so high that this will actually not rebound and go back down in price? So my expectation is that it will, and I think that this is really crazy. I did not expect another jump up from last week, and so this really is the place where I'm thinking I should consider selling the majority, half my plex or something like that, and then be ready to jump back this summer when I do expect these to be down in price. We'll see if I'm right or not, but this is crazy high in my opinion. Next up, we'll take a look at the multiple pilot train certificates, which to me, you can see this chart is much flatter. This is at 1.9 billion for the sellers, 1.8 billion for the buyers. So multiple pilot train certificates does the same as 500 plex, except for a second character on your account. So this feels again like an indication that we are in a bubble when it comes to plex. For the skill extractors, that does continue to go up in tandem, of course, because there is a one-on-one conversion between plex and skill extractors possible. 520 million now for the sellers, 490 million for the buyers. Interestingly enough, you can see that the plex market is now dominated. Let's see. Oh, I should put up the filter, and that's why we saw this difference. Let's take a look at skill extractors here. Multiple parties quickly as well. All right, that's still in line with what we saw, but the skill extractors, they go down to 508 million in the player owned trade hubs and 490 million for the buyers. So up for the buyers, down for the sellers. That's where the cutting edge margin of these trades is happening in the player owned trade hubs, of course, because you don't pay taxes there, which you do pay in GTA 4.4, which causes the margin between sellers and buyers to increase. And so I thought that the plex market was completely dominated by the trade hubs, which is the case. I mean, I think that there's been so much going on in the plex market that Perimeter has completely taken over those trades, and so you'll get a little bit more than 4.4 million for your plex pretty easily, and it's the same for the skill extractor market. This is starting to move, although not in the same massive amount, but this is starting to slowly move and find its way to the Perimeter trade hub as well. I think perhaps I should swing by and maybe like divide my plex sale, try to see if I can sell some of those at that premium price in GTA. Oops, and it's for plex that I was talking about, and then see if I need to unload more in the player owned trade hubs. We'll see how that works out. So skill extractors also up in price in tandem. Let's move on to the injectors next. Also going for another 1 year high point in the last couple of days, hesitating to go even higher. 931 million for the sellers, 918 million. That's almost a billion ISK for a large scale injectors. Large scale injector, excuse me. It's almost 950 million in GTA 4.4, quite expensive as well. I should of course have just clicked the filter, but all right. Very expensive, a 1 year high point as well. And then we have the small scale injector that is actually going up more quickly. Looking at the chart here, breaking through the 190 million barrier, although in the player owned trade hubs we're 188.5 million. So in GTA we should see 192.5 million, and then the buyers are coming in at 183. Why is this important? Well, if you're looking for the best place to sell, well, the fact that the average price is showing up above 190 million does show that people come to GTA as well, and that you still manage to get sales despite the premium that you're paying by coming here. Very interesting. After that, we still have the daily alpha injector that is also going to a 1 year high point, going up above 70 million ISK. And of course, we had this late December sale from CCP that drove the price down to 40 million ISK. You are now selling them for 75 million ISK. Buyers coming in at 69. That's almost a doubling of the price since that sale. So this was a great opportunity to actually buy some. But looking at what's happening at the moment, we have an Omega game time sale. It's not showing up on on the chart for plex at all. That one is up to a 1-year high point yet again, with super expensive Omega game time, basically from the in-game currency perspective. Next up, we'll be moving on to the minerals at 1010. And let's take a look at that. We've got titanium basically flat, trying to stay above 4.5 ISK. And we go to JITA for 468 for the sellers. Buyers coming in at 453 for the first one. Good news. 450 for a couple of bigger buyers as well. So that does show that there is a decent demand for titanium. I do think the market is trying to slowly, keep in mind the nerfs coming to the Rorcal. It is going to have an impact, although I personally still feel like while the nerfs might be quite significant, that it is going to have a limited impact on the market itself, because the problem is so large at this point that there is a lot of not only stocks and thus not only inertia in the mineral market itself, but also I think in Gnostic player behavior, because a lot of people have made those massive investments into their Rorcals, and they're not just gonna drop out because of this nerf. They're gonna continue those activities, perhaps switch it up a little bit, find the new most efficient way to use them, but they'll still massively use them because it's still the best mining ship out there. So I'm not sure if it is going to have that big of an impact on the mineral market. Certainly short term it shouldn't, because of just the reserves that exist and the inertia that's gonna bring. But yeah, slight uptick here in titanium, and interestingly enough, we have buyers go up to 4.5 ISK now. For pyrite, we also have a bit of an uptick here. Look at that, trying to play with 4 ISK on a couple of days as well. Sellers coming in at 409, buyers coming in at 392. That is obviously a little uptick as well, which I think is very good news for pyrite that has been struggling for a very long time. Next up we have Mexilon, and that's where we like to see an uptick, going back above 60 ISK. That's not so bad. 63.38 for the first seller. Buyers coming in at 58.79. If you could push those back up above 60 ISK, then I think that there is potential for Mexilon to grow in price again. Very good news, I would say, for high-sec miners as well. Try to get that Mexilon titanium mix. Looks like they are up in price slightly. Next up we've got Isogen. Here we've got a little bit of bad news, but we gotta keep this in perspective. Since November we had this slow increase in price, bit of hesitation, and then here all of a sudden since late February we had a little bit of a rush up towards 20 ISK all of a sudden, a bit too much for the market to absorb in one go, and as a result we have to decline in price a little bit. Sellers coming in at 17.64, buyers at 16.33, and so what you're seeing here is what I was talking about. Large stocks are going to create some inertia in the market, because you do have some increased volumes, and especially here on a single day, that has caused the decrease in price. So what we're seeing is that any increases in prices does bring out some slumbering reserves here and there, and probably in pretty massive amounts, apparently 2 times the normal volumes, easily 2 to 3 times I would even say, and that then gets dumped on the market, trying to take advantage of that better price, causing the price to crash back down, of course. Next up we've got Noxium, that is now broken, that has broken through the 300 ISK barrier, which is not good news I would say, although on its 1-year chart it is definitely the best performing mineral, I think, of the ones that we are checking. 302.41 for the first seller, so still trying to sell above 300 ISK. How long can they maintain that? I think it's going to be harder to do now with buyers below 275 at 274.37. As a result, I think that now the margin is really starting to widen. You can see the average price drop below 300 ISK. That I think is going to be the trigger for sellers to eventually just break down and start selling Noxium below 300 ISK. But it has performed well above my personal expectation. I thought that here, after this hesitation here in August, I've been expecting Noxium to basically start moving in the 275 to 300 band rather than stay above the 300 ISK for, well, the majority of the time, especially during the EVE talks. Sellers are still managing to get their Noxium sold for more than 300 ISK. So very impressive performance considering the rest of the mineral market actually. Then we have Zydrine that is flat at 500 ISK. You can see that we started at 700 and this stuff used to cost so much because it was nullsec exclusive. Zydrine now selling for 511 ISK, buyers coming in at 502, super narrow margin again. Basically the market has found its price range for Zydrine. Then for Megasite we get the same pattern, also just above 500 ISK. It's actually 516 for the sellers, 495 for the buyers, a bit more margin in Megasite, which makes it a little different from Zydrine, but basically these two minerals have become one and the same when it comes to the market and the price range. And the pattern here, 7 million, it's I guess because Zydrine is a bit more, has a slightly higher amount in the ore compositions than Megasite, that it has a narrow margin, and you see slightly higher volume, 7.5 million, 4 million, 3 million, 1.4 million. So here I am personally seeing moon mining activity in 0.5 systems with those volumes. And then for Megasite you've got 4 million, half a million, half a million, half a million, another 1 million here, slightly lower in volumes, but again I think what people are grabbing from a moon cycle being brought to the market, which has completely crashed the price down long term, of course, and then now has very much stabilized the price as well, narrowing the margin significantly. And there's just almost no chance here anymore for a cartel to try to drive up the price by keeping their supplies of the market and things like that. That's almost impossible to do now, which used to be the case because they were exclusive from nullsec and wormhole. So these minerals have completely changed, crashed down in price and stabilized because of what has happened in the game. It does make Tech 1 ships and modules much more affordable, easier to produce. So everything has an advantage and a disadvantage in the sandbox, of course. And then we still have to take a look at Morphite, that was working on a comeback and is trying to hold on to 8,000 ISK now. So early March we had this incredible buy opportunity where I think you could try to buy Morphite for like 7,200 ISK or something like that. Sellers are up to 8,200 pretty much, and buyers are at 7,700 ISK. So it's still very cheap, especially if you look at this 1-year chart, but it is not at its lowest point anymore. Moving on to PI then, coming in at 1720. Let's see what's happening here. I personally think that we will see a continuation of the trend, although will the plex bubble eventually cause some changes to the PI market? It is possible. Here we've got broadcast nodes that on today selling for 2.1 million on average. Sellers coming in at a bit above 2.1 million, probably the average price. Buyers are at 2.1 million as well, so that's up quite obviously, showing a bit more demand all of a sudden. Basically broadcast nodes still a touch below average for the year, but trying to get back on its average price. Then we've got construction blocks, a little bit of the same pattern. You can clearly see here in October, November that we were trading close to 10,000 ISK on some days. Then now we normalize to 11,000 ISK, but we're trying to get back to that 12,000, 12,500 ISK, which I would consider to be the actual average price for construction blocks. And it's 12,200 for the sellers, 11,200 for the buyers. Still a healthy margin between the two. We're still trading below average, but we're definitely getting closer to a more normal price here again. And this is a pattern that I'm slowly starting to see in the non-PI related materials. Consumer electronics, you can see the same thing where we had average prices breaking through the 12,000 ISK barrier on quite a few occasions, and then substantially in January. We're now back up, stabilizing, trying to get back to 13k, which again is not the average, still a little bit below average, but 13.5 to 14k would actually be the average price on the seller side. I would say 13,400, trying to get back to that 13.5 indeed, 12,755 for the buyers. Still a decent margin between the two, but it's the same pattern again. We are slowly pushing the prices back to a more average price here for lots of these PI materials. Then we come to the first fuel related PI material, and that is very interesting. Now you might have had an inkling that this was happening because on the ticker you could see that we had our fuel blocks that I take a look at for the ticker every week break through 19,000 ISK on the downside. well, it doesn't really rhyme too well with year-high PI materials that you actually have these super low fuel prices. So coolants having to give back a lot of ground all of a sudden, breaking through 12,500 discs, selling now for 13,900, but the buyers are gone, 11,550 for the buyers. Very large margin, actually an average price heading for, let's take a look at that here, 12,000 disc a couple of days ago. That is a significant decline, of course, from 15,000 disc. And as a result, I think that this is also putting more pressure on fuel prices in general. So here, coolant's the first one to really have a big fallback. It is still above average, but it's pretty obvious that the 1-year high point is over here. Enriched uranium slowly showing the same pattern, went up to 16,000 disc, is now selling for 14,880. Buyers at 12,600, that's a 2,000 disc, more than 2,000 disc margin, whereas the others usually at like 10% or a bit less than that. And so here again we are starting to see that the gains have to be given back, and the opposite move basically from the non-fuel related PI materials is happening here. A decline in price, we're staying above average, but we are not at those 1-year highs anymore. Integrity response drones, same thing, trying to get back to that 2.5 million. Oops, excuse me. Sellers are almost there. There's one seller for 2.5 million, then 2.6 billion. They're really trying to push back up towards that average price, and the margin is still healthy, but is not too crazy anymore. 2.4 million for the buyers of integrity response drones, which I think means that we are on that upslope here as well. Mechanical parts, same thing, went up to 13k, has to give back that ground, is currently selling for 12,000 disc almost, buyers at 11,500 disc. That's a pretty narrow margin here, so mechanical parts of course did not go up as highly as the coolants and doesn't have to crash back down that much to get back to an average price, 11,000 disc for the year. But actually, if you look at what was happening before that, if we manage to stay above 10,000 disc, we are actually in a pretty good spot. Nuclear reactors is trying to show that volatility that I want to see nuclear reactors for trades, but it's just not big enough. Basically, we went down here to 86,000 disc on average, when I think we saw during Eve Talk there that we basically had 0 buyers, and now we are selling it for 98,000 to 103,000 disc, buyers coming in at 93,000 disc, but this is not large enough, I think, in price swings to really make for good trades just yet. Organic mortar applicators trying to get back to that 1.1 million average and almost succeeding, so just below that for the sellers, and actually 1.060 for the buyers. Very narrow margin here, so obviously demand is starting to show up. This makes me wonder a little bit, are there some sort of leaks, or is there some information that I'm not aware of myself, that there is some structure work coming on? I'm really curious if we get some announcements, perhaps some CCP dev let something go to the wrong person at Amsterdam or something like that. But I am seeing definitely some position taking, some increased demand here in these advanced PI materials that should be tied to structure. So we'll see in the upcoming weeks and months if any of that holds water. It is of course tinfoil hattery of the best order, but yeah, it's kind of weird that we are seeing this. Then we get robotics that is trying to stay at 100,000 disc, just above that for the sellers, 97,000 for the buyers. Self-harmonizing power cores, look at that, 1.9 million. Now here of course you can see that we don't have a big volume increase, so this is more like market normalization. Can't keep that price forever of course. Selling for 2.1 million, buyers are just below 2 million though. They have been pushed up as well, showing with the volumes here as well, 8,000 units, 4,000 units, 1,900 units. I mean, this is some trade that's happening, and when we were here a couple of weeks ago, all of these buyers were not present. In fact, in the last 24 hours, you can see that we actually have quite a few buyers competing with each other from 1.95 to 1.995 in the buyers here. So there's definitely renewed interest in the advanced PI materials that is driving the price back to an average a yearly average, I would say. Superconductors back down a bit, but to a normal price, 13,500 for the sellers, 13,000 for the buyers, is right around its average normal price. The sculptures is actually declining to a 1-year low point, which to me is super interesting, because from my experience with previous releases on structures, test sculptures actually also jumped up together with the advanced PI materials, seeing these at a 1-year low point, less than 7,000 for the sellers, 6,000 ISK for the buyers. I would say this is a buy opportunity if you look at what the rest of the PI market is doing. This is super pronounced, 1-year low point, buying for 6,000 ISK is super cheap, so you should be able to buy well below the entire chart. And then I'm talking about that 5-day moving average, of course, the blue chart that is. And so it should be really easy to grab some very cheap test sculptures and to be ready, because this is not meant to last, especially if you look at what's happening with the advanced PI materials. And then finally we get the wetware mainframes. That is actually also showing us a second potential buy opportunity, selling for 2.2 million, whereas at 215 though, I think the counter move has already begun. But if you're fast, you can still grab wetware mainframes for less than average. All the others are starting to slowly edge towards a more normal price for advanced PI materials. Very interesting. Let's see if it was complete tinfoil hattery or if there is a structure announcement on the horizon. Let's move on to advanced moon materials then. That's gonna be at 26 minutes. Like that. And here of course we have a lot of inertia. We definitely don't have a major war in nullsec, which is something that we have missed this winter. I wish that we had more deployments and something like another World War B or something like that. Not sure what, or the casino wars. I mean, they all always have names, and each side tries to dominate and decide on the name. I'm not into those kinds of politics, but usually some big wars do mean some nice moves up for advanced moon materials. Here now we've got the crystalline carbonite that's basically floating just above 150, never really breaking through that. 155 for the sellers, 148 for the buyers. You're still buying below the entire chart, so yeah, very low at the moment. For Fernite Carbide, same pattern, actually at the 1-year low point at 137 to 140, 141 for the sellers, 120 for the buyers. That is quite pronounced, very much below the entire chart, and still a buy opportunity in my opinion. But as I've said before, you are dependent on something pretty major happening, either from CCP, which is very unlikely, or from nullsec itself, where we need a big blow up, and not sure how that's gonna work out. Perhaps with the changes to the remote reps, with those diminishing returns there, some groups might be enticed to finally take advantage of their big stockpiles of capitals. Now that's basically what this I think will do in really big engagements, is it's gonna force trading. It's going to force losses on all sides no matter what happens, and so could be interesting, could be a trigger for war. Titanium carbide is actually going back up to 200 ISK here. That's quite interesting. 199 for the sellers, 187 for the buyers, and basically over this 1-year chart is back on an average price. Then we've got tungsten carbide that has done the same and is now hesitating at the tail end. Went up to 225, is down to 211 for the sellers and 195 for the buyers, but it is definitely close still to its average price, and not as bad, if a low price is bad, as Fernite carbide and crystalline carbonite that are languishing at these low points. Then we've got our metamaterials. Let's start with photonic. Same pattern, of course, probably tied, you know, to the crystalline carbonite. So also still selling for less than 17,000 ISK, buyers coming in at pretty much the same price. So this is your bottom, or is it? That is always the real question, of course. Plasmonic metamaterials actually jumped up a little bit, back to more than 20,000 ISK. Sellers already coming down to a less than 20,000 ISK price range, 18,000 for the buyers. There's basically not a lot of demand for this. Then we have our non-linear metamaterials that jumped up a little bit, but quite shyly compared to the carbonites, and already reverting back down. 26,000 for the sellers, 25,400 for the buyers. It's pretty narrow margin, and below average for the year, but less than 20k on the buyers would be an opportunity. So still a long way from that. And then terahertz metamaterials, quite a surprise to see a more volatile looking chart from 20,500 to 27,500, back down, back up, back down. And on the right now we are back on the lower side of things. 23,300 for the sellers, 22,750 for the buyers. A narrow margin here again on the lower end of the price, but below average, not an all-time low by any means. Then we still have some other advanced move materials to take a look at and to see if we can spot any trends. Yeah, a little bit of a comeback for fermion and condensate here, trying to get back to 100,000 ISK. Sellers at 98,000, buyers at 92,000, trying to get back 110 to 111, 110,000 to 100,000 to 110,000, excuse me, that's the range I was looking for, would be the yearly average, I would say, especially before this slump. So we still have a ways to go, but trying to get back up there. Ferrogel, same thing, hesitating at the tail end, but trying to get back to 50,000 ISK, 49 for the sellers, 47 for the buyers. Fullerites, quite a bit more muted, holding on to 1000 ISK, not succeeding. First few sellers coming in at less than 1000 ISK here. Buyers are below 900 ISK, that is obviously pretty low as well, showing the lack of demand in Fullerites at the moment. Hypersynaptic fibers, also definitely not moving too much, selling for 12,200, buyers at 11,200, healthy margins. We can clearly see that we've got this flat price, not going anywhere at the lower range of things when there is no demand. And then you get this attempt to get back to an average whenever there is some demand coming in. But can you make some big trades on that? I think it's very difficult. Nanotransmitters, trying to get back to 5,000 ISK for the sellers, 4,800 for the buyers. So here we get a narrow margin. And so you can see that our bottom was reached here in October at 4,500. So we are definitely still below average, but not at the bottom. Phenolic composites, actually a one-year low point. This is quite worrying, or quite an opportunity, of course. All right, Russell is sending me more mails. I think he's trying to grab some skins from the market. 1,767 ISK for the sellers, 1,630 for the buyers. That is, of course, quite low, below 1,700. That's, yeah, around here on the chart. Another quite pronounced one-year low point and potentially a good time to jump in. Ceramic fibers flat at the 450, so that's another no for me personally, and that is it. So yeah, phenolic composites, that is a crazy one-year low point, of course. And then we had the Fernite carbide, that is also in a pretty low spot and has been there for quite a little bit. Moving on to our Tech 2 ships, 3230. Like that, and don't think it's a problem that I open this. Yeah, all you're seeing is the title, so that should be okay, so that it doesn't keep blinking. That annoys me. And let's move on to these Tech 2 ships. Then we've got the Ares, flat and still on that very, very slow downtrend, breaking to 27.5 million. Now selling for 27 million on the first one, was at 27.2, buyers still at 25.5. So basically definitely very cheap, but not a lot of movement to be spotted. On the Basilisk front, it's a little bit better, right? You've got these spikes up to 300 million from 200 million. That's trade worthy. We went back down a couple of weeks ago to 210 million ISK. Now we're selling for 240, buyers up to 216. Unfortunately, we're already flattening out, so that volatility seems to be over, and we're still below average for the Basilisk. The Cerberus is on a normal price range, slightly down for the week. 270 for the sellers, 250 for the buyers. Not much to say. It's a reasonable normal price for the Cerberus. Also, again, perhaps, you know, a peak that gets snuffed out very quickly. Again, a lowering of volatility. I think it is possible. We've got the Crow here again, breaking back down through the 30 million barrier. just below 30 million for the sellers, 109 of them coming in here, 27 million for the buyers. Pretty narrow margin here, a bit below average. And again, what I prefer to see is this, of course, lots of volatility here, right? Almost a no-brainer. Buy close to 25 million, sell at 32, 33 million ISK. That's a nice little trade to make. But now we've got this slower slope showing, I think, a decrease in volatility yet again. For the Guardian, we had a nice spike up to 300 million as well, back down to 230. Slowly back up to 250 right now for this week. It's actually 242 for the sellers and 219 for the buyers. I think buyers are up a little bit, sellers up a touch, but again have this too slow, in my opinion, a slope for good trades. The Heretic is also slowly working its way back up, trying to get back to 70 million. Is 67 for the sellers, still 60 million for the buyers. That is still super cheap. So interdictors and interdictors in case of nullsec wars are prime targets, things that need to be replaced in surprisingly large numbers. Especially if you look at the average trades here, there is opportunity there at the fact that you're still buying heretics for 60 million ISK, but you need a lot of patience and don't go overboard with your volumes. Then we've got the Hound going back down. Are we below 30 million? Nope, sellers still just above that. Buyers are at 28 million. And again, we can see that this slope is, this is a nice upslope, right? 28 million and then 40 million perhaps possible. But now we've got this slower slope, a decrease in volatility yet again on the chart. Then we've got the Ishtar actually 1 year low point now. That is interesting on volume, so should be more dumping. 220 million for the sellers, 212 for the buyers. If you're looking for a cheap Ishtar, then this is the time to grab it. If you're looking for an investment Ishtar, have the patience of a buy order. Try 215, something like that. But it is absolutely possible, I think. If you look at this chart, it is also a little bit counter to the others. Those are actually recovering from a slight uptick most of the time. Here we have this more than 1 month decline to a 1 year low point. I think it's an opportunity for a very cheap Ishtar right now. And potentially a resale at a better price, I think, is possible. Then we have the Manticore if it wants to load. Please keep the crashes to CC, that would be nice. Let's see, that at least does respond. So we want to see the Manticore. And I actually lose my connection to the server. That is quite annoying. And we are back. So that was not actually a client crash, but apparently my internet gave out for a moment. We'll see about that. I did buy some new power lines recently, which I installed last week. But this is the first time that I see that I completely lost my connection. So I'll have to take a look at that. I'm going to try to pick back up from where we left off and then stitch the two parts together. Hopefully that will all work out. Quality might be a little bit lower because of that. But yeah, let's give it a go. So we were at the Ishtar that was very close to 1 year low point, and I think the right time to grab it. Then we were gonna move on to the Manticore, of course. That jumped up to 35 million ISK on increased volumes, selling for 35 million, buyers coming at 31.5, and again, not that great in volatility. In my opinion, 31.5 to 35 million is not enough to try to get good trades on. Then we get the Munin, that is basically flat at a slightly below average price, 266 million for the sellers, 251 for the buyers. Decent availability and everything for, I think, what is a popular ship in the Imperium. Then we have the Nemesis. That one is actually up all of a sudden to 34 million for the sellers and 33 million for the buyers as well. That's a pretty sharp increase in demand all of a sudden with a buy opportunity a couple of months ago at less than 25 million ISK. So here we do have a potential trade right now with a 10 million ISK profit if you bought your Nemesis at the right time. So first ship where I say, yep, nice, enough volatility, good to finally see it in the Nemesis. And it's again stealth bombers, logistics cruisers. I kind of like those two categories to try and get something like that going. And if I'm not mistaken, if I take a look at that, do I have? Yeah, I bought some at 24.5. So there is definitely a good trade for me to make if I'm fast enough. We'll see if it works out. Then we have the Oneros. Yeah, definitely the worst one in my opinion when it comes to the volumes. Now, quite a few volume spikes all of a sudden with hardly any impact on the price. So selling for 190 million, buyers at 178, but I said logistics cruisers, I love them for some volatility, but the Oneros is the one that I think is the worst to risk stuff on because of its volumes. Then we have the Purifier. That's what we like to see, of course. Some nice spikes which happened right at the start of March, or late February I should say, jumping up to more than 40 million ISK. Back down to 30, and now we're slightly up, almost 32 million for the sellers, 30 million for the buyers. But again, bit of a slowdown right here, and so probably not enough volatility. Then we've got the Saber, the interdictor, which as I've said, I think both are in a very interesting spot here. 66.5 million for the sellers, 62.4 million for the buyers. If we look at this entire chart, this is still very, very cheap. We had a buy opportunity here where the average price went to less than 65 million, and the buyers are still low enough to try and make that happen. So don't buy too many of these, but a couple of interdictors might be interesting. Then we have the Scimitar, little jump up, but unfortunately, in my opinion, again, not enough. And then a slowdown right away, which I think is another sign that volatility is decreasing. 218 million for the sellers, 193 for the buyers. Yeah, well, definitely below average, pretty cheap, but do you still want to make a move on that? Personally, I'd be hesitant. Then we get a Stiletto that went up to almost 35 million and is already back down. 28.6 for the sellers, 26.8 for the buyers. So here, Take 2 market. Yeah, the good news is in the Nemesis. That one is up all of a sudden on massive volume increases. A nice little sell opportunity, something that you might take advantage of. Try to grab some profits in the Take 2 market. But in general, I am seeing this slowdown in volatility, which I think is not good news for active traders. Next up, we have the Take 3 market, and I'll have to take a look at the timestamp after the fact, of course, in my edits. So I will actually put down 430 plus 430 so that I can find it back. And let's get started with the destroyers. Ooh, Confessor, little jump up to 42.5 million, 43 million actually for the sellers, 39.3 for the buyers. Volume wise though, this feels pretty normal, 38, 79, 21. We've got another 41 down here. So this is just a bit of an increase in price, bringing the Confessor well above 40 million on average at this point. Availability is still alright, not super high, not super low, definitely something that feels in line with what the market needs. We get the Hecate next, also a jump up, second jump up. Is there like a balance, something that I'm not aware of that they're so popular? Of course, the Hecate did just get that very cool skin, but 47 million for the sellers and 41.3 for the buyers. Availability, again, we do have 199 here, but everything else feels pretty normal and doable for the market. That's a little bit of a surprise. What am I not aware of? Jackdaw, another one? No, this one is actually flat at 45 million ISK. Sellers at 44 actually, buyers at 40 million, and again 50, 23, 22. That's actually pretty normal, maybe even on the low end for the Jackdaw. And then we get the Svepel finally. That's also flat, a little bit below 40 million ISK. 40 for the sellers, 34 for the buyers. Again, volume 65, 74, a little bit more, but most of the competing sell orders are actually even smaller. So none of this feels out of line. To surprise, price spikes, especially in the Hecate here, going up to well above 45 million ISK all of a sudden. So some volatility in here. I would personally suspect some Gnostic entity grabbing another Hecate fleet here, and maybe Confessor as well. I think for PvP these do make for very popular choices at the moment. So if you have any comments on that, definitely feel free to put them down below so that we can know your thoughts on these two jumps that come as a bit of a surprise, despite the fact that, well, because especially I would say the volumes still feel very much in line with what the market needs and with what we've been seeing in the last couple of weeks. Moving on to the cruisers then, here is the Legion, basically flat on an average normal price. We're talking 169 for the sellers, 161 for the buyers. A lack of buyers is quite obvious. Volume wise 82, 27, 13. This again feels quite normal in availability. The lack of buyers is worrying, but it might actually create a buy opportunity if we would go down more in price, which at the moment we are not. Loki, same pattern, went to actually a little bit below average on the price the last couple of days, back up to 200 million. So it's 219 for the sellers. I'd call that actually a slightly expensive price. 170 for the buyers, that's a pretty wide margin. So again, showing a lack of buyers in the Tech 3 cruiser market. And then the volumes here are at the low end or pretty normal, because there is actually a decent amount of Lokis available on the market in total. Then we get the Proteus next, very flat at 180 again, 175 for the sellers, 161 for the buyers, and again, just no buyers in Jita. Are we buying these around Jita? Yeah, in perimeter there's a bit more, so maybe for the Tech 3 cruisers we should actually start to look at the perimeter market, but it's also 2114. We're not really buying anything in substantial numbers there either. So I'm basically still seeing this lack of demand that is actually keeping the prices stable on the cruisers. Then we get a Tengu that went up on the ticker. I'm not sure, 182. Oh man, Jita. Nobody's buying Tengus in Jita. And then we do have some buyers in the perimeter trade hub here. Very interesting availability in Jita and then in the trade hubs. That's actually pretty much the same. Kind of a weird spot here. And then these are at range. Yeah, these are at range. So they can actually buy in Jita from the perimeter tranquility trading tower here. So availability here on the Tengu again, 13, 26, 13. This again feels actually pretty normal. We just have a lack of demand in the Tech 3 cruisers in Jita 4.4 at the moment, which is, to my surprise, stabilizing the price rather than crashing it down substantially. So that extra little bit of demand from outside of Jita is actually helping keep things in line here. Tech 3 in general, no signs of oversupply, no signs, actually some signs of a lack of demand, especially in the cruisers there. And yeah, a couple of, especially this Hecate jump here comes as a little bit of a surprise. And then for the extra product this week, coming in at plus 945, let's say. I'll put the right tickers down below. I had a request for ice, so let's take a quick look here. Not ice products, but I think the request was actually you should put ice in. Let's see if we put down ice like that. Then can I find some stuff to put the ice, you know, as a category in the regular stuff? Here we go. We get blue ice and things like that. I think that was what the request is for. Now, honestly, I think that this is not a good idea. This would be like putting in Feldspar and compressed Feldspar, which in and of itself is already a huge category as well. But on top of that, the more interesting part is, of course, the individual components, the minerals, you could say, of ice itself. And that becomes a super large category again, which would mean a lot more time for Eve Talk, which at the moment I don't feel like I have all of that extra time. So I'll take a quick look at ice and compressed ice in general, but I don't think that I can put that in as like an extra category or anything like that. It's also not that interesting. I don't think you can see on this chart already that the way this moves and the volumes that we're seeing here is completely different from the regular ores and minerals and things like that. So here we've got blue ice actually well below average, currently selling for, well, you can also see the lack of activity on the market. In this one, 300,000 disc, 200,000 disc for the buyers, and the average price is actually 200,000 discs. So it's mostly nobody's buying ice here in Jita, blue ice, and we've got some people dumping a little bit of it to the buy orders. Then we've got compressed blue ice. That's a bit of a more normal chart. Of course, if you want to trade it, you're gonna compress it, and it's actually very low, definitely trading well below average at the moment, selling for 300,000 disc, buyers coming in at 285, decent availability in the compressed blue ice. Then we've got compressed thick blue ice. Yeah, again, a worse chart. I think we're just not gonna see enough volumes to make a big market here, and the average feeling is slightly below average in price. Where's the rest of the ice? Thick blue ice. That's not really a chart that we can work with. Aren't there other ice forms? Let's see. There must be. Materials. Raw materials. Ice ores. There we go. That's actually where we had to go. And so let's quickly go over these. But again, you're gonna see these charts with these data points at the exact same place. So that's either sellers or winners winning out, and it's just not budging. On the compressed forms, we have slightly better charts, definitely trading well below average on all of, well, compressed dark glitter trading actually high. All right, bit of a surprise. Enriched clear icicle, definitely below average again. And then we get the gelitis, that's trading at a high point. That's interesting, but you can see that it again makes for a pretty damn big category in and of itself. And the glacial mass well below average. And then compressed clear crusts dipping below average. Compressed crystallos actually at a high point. Man, that's kind of weird that we have this this different pattern. Two clear different patterns here, below average or actually at high points on all of these compressed ores. Look at that compressed white glaze, actually 1 year low point here. Very, very cheap. And then again, if we look at stuff like dark glitter, then you get these terrible charts that you can't really work with. So I don't think it's worth it to put this into an extra category. I don't even think that the compressed ice is that interesting. Sure, well below average, which of course is an indication that the components of these, like the isotopes, are well below average as well. On most of them, we get some exceptions that might be interesting to take a look at, probably regional reasons and things like that. But overall, yeah, a quick look at this is basically all I'm willing to do. I can't say that I want to cover ice itself on a weekly basis. We have gauges to take a look at that. Isotopes often quite interesting for trading, and then fuels themselves, of course, are highly tied to that and should give you an indication on what's happening, which we know fuels are definitely pretty low at the moment, and so we see that reflected in these compressed ice prices that tend to be, there are some exceptions, well below average as well. And yeah, bit of a hiccup on this one. Hopefully I can fix my internet so that we don't have that in the future, but that's going to be it for this ETH Talk, guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.